thou with him spread out the sky, which is strong and as a molten looking glass?
For this they willingly are ignorant of, that by the word of God the heavens were of old, and the earth standing out of the water and in the water.
When I look at the people who signed the Antarctic Treaty, see, this is what happened, man. In the 1920s, Admiral Byrd went to the North Pole and supposedly found an opening to inner Earth, which is incredible if that's true. You would think he'd spend the rest of his career, you know, checking that out. I mean, and everybody would go check it out. But they didn't. He went to the South Pole, and you would think, well, maybe presumably he's going to see if there's another opening down there. But he spent the entire rest of his military career and life actually going down there. He died in 1957. Right before he died, there were a couple of very interesting, this is what my latest work is a timeline that I'm putting together. And I actually start with the Tower of Babel, and I'm going all the way up to this September with CERN. That's the timeline that I'm covering. But really focusing in on the 1940s, 50s, and 60s, and up to 72 during the Apollo program. You've got, people never really got to Antarctica until the 1800s because they just, you know, weren't able to do it. Late 1800s finally start finding ways to break through the ice, and this is interesting. James Cook, I think was his name. I believe it was in the 1700s, maybe 1700s or 1800s. He got to the coast of Antarctica. Let me see if I could pull this up here. Yeah, okay. This is a work in progress. I'm not ready to actually publish this blog yet, but I have it kind of a work in progress. Okay, 1773, on 30 January 1774, James Cook reaches 71 degrees 10 minutes south, farthest south, coming within 75 miles of the Antarctic mainland without seeing it. Okay. Later reports said that during 3 voyages lasting 3 years and 8 days, Captain Cook and crew sailed a total of 60,000 miles along the Antarctic coastline, never once finding an inlet or path through or beyond the massive glacial wall. So the other question is, well, how come ships don't go off the sea if it's flat? How come ships don't fall off the edge? Well, here's why you don't fall off the edge. There's a 200 to 300 foot high wall that is the coastline of Antarctica. It's the border that Scripture says is keeping everything in. Nothing's going past that. But yet the Earth is 25,000 miles in circumference, allegedly. It took him 60,000 miles to circumnavigate Antarctica. That's curious. Now, I think that's cumulative over 3 years, though, so I don't know quite what to make of that statement. But I don't know. So in the 1700s, this guy gets there. You get into the 1800s, they get closer and closer. And then when you get to the 1900s, that's where things get really interesting. Shackleton, this guy Shackleton, goes down there on the, and I think I put this in my original blog. He goes down there on the name of the ship is the Nimrod. He goes down there on the Nimrod, and it's called the Nimrod Expedition. I'm like, seriously? Okay, Nimrod's goal was to reach into heaven, right? Yeah, the Nimrod Expedition. So you can click on the link I got there and read all about the Nimrod Expedition, British Antarctic Expedition, otherwise known as the Nimrod Expedition. And it was on the name of the ship was the Nimrod right here. Okay, Nimrod was trying to reach into heaven by going up. Could it be that these guys are trying to go out, try to find the ground floor? I don't know, but I mean, why do you? And this is what really got me, is they did so in 1908. 1908. I'm like, really? 1908? Seriously? 1908 is when Nimrod was born, according to my other. Let me see. What I put in here. This is one of my other blogs. Yeah. Okay. The 350 post-flood years of Noah's life. This is a chart I did last year, and the follow-up chart, the Nimrod-Abraham timeline. Nimrod was born in 1908 AM, or years since creation. And then 1908, see, 1907 to 1909, well, that's 1908. Nimrod went to Antarctica. I'm like, I mean, you can't write this stuff. I mean, wow. Okay, so they go down there. A whole bunch of people are, you know, from that point on, once they start finding ways to get through the ice to get there, more and more expeditions and better ships are built and used to get there. Then you get to Admiral Byrd. Now, Admiral Byrd goes down there several times, and one of the operations is called Operation High Jump. And you're like,
oh, geez.
Yeah, right. Operation High Jump. Operation High Jump. Really? Operation High Jump. I mean, you know, because they went out there with aircraft carriers and airplanes and stuff. You know, some real heavy equipment and stuff like that. Operation High Jump. So then he gets on TV, national TV, and he does this radio show where he talks about all of the natural resources down there. I mean, coal and uranium and stuff that fuel the world forever. It's wonderful. And you can go on YouTube and look up the Admiral Byrd news interview. I think it was on CBS. And it's wonderful. And all these nations are going down there, you know, Russia and Japan, all these nations are going down there. Check it out. Well, then he goes down after that interview. They go down on the next mission, which I believe was called Operation Deep Freeze. And then all of a sudden everything changes. Everybody pulls out. They leave Antarctica. And all the nations that were down there doing whatever they were doing signed a treaty, the Antarctic Treaty. And I believe it was 1958 or somewhere thereabouts, saying, nope, nobody can stake a claim to Antarctica, and if you're going to go down there, you can only go down there for scientific reasons under carefully restricted guidance, but it's not a free-for-all. Nobody can just, you know, hey, I'm going to go check out Antarctica and do a high jump on my own. No, can't do it. So when I look at the nations that signed the Antarctic Treaty, and I look at the nations that are putting forward quote-unquote space videos of the Earth, they're the same people. So if I was to put on my tinfoil hat and play the conspiratorial role here, there definitely appears to be some very suspicious things that took place. And then all of a sudden NASA is formed, and then simultaneously you have Russia and the United States doing high altitude nuclear bomb testing. They're blowing up nuclear bombs high up in the atmosphere, and they called it Operation Fishbowl.
Oh, geez.
I mean, you can't make this stuff up, man. I mean, they're calling it Operation Fishbowl. Okay? So, I mean...
All right. So, Admiral Byrd goes down there, Operation High Jump, 1946 through 47, and Operation Deep Freeze, 1955 through 56. Then he dies on March 11th, 1957. Then the Antarctic Treaty takes place shortly after his death. We see that the main treaty was open for signature on December 1st, 1959, and officially entered into force on June 23rd, 1961. Meanwhile, okay, let's put the chronology here. You got, again, Operation High Jump 46 through 47, Operation Deep Freeze 55 to 56. He dies in 57. NASA's formed in 1958. Then after Operation Deep Freeze and whatever weirdness took place down there, everybody leaves Antarctica, and they go and form this Antarctic Treaty and put that into place in 1961. The original signatories were the 12 countries active in Antarctica during the International Geophysical Year 1957 to 58. The 12 countries that had significant interest in Antarctica at the time were Argentina, Australia, Belgium, Chile, France, Japan, New Zealand, Norway, South Africa, the Soviet Union, the United Kingdom, and of course the United States. These countries had established over 50 Antarctic stations for the International Geophysical Year. The treaty was a diplomatic expression of the operational and scientific cooperation that had been achieved on the ice. Something happened down there after Operation Deep Freeze, and presumably about the time that Admiral Byrd died. So all these nations that I just talked about here, they leave there, they come back, they sign this Antarctic Treaty. At the same time, NASA is formed, and right away, the United States and Russia start launching high-altitude nuclear bombs in the atmosphere. Now, I can see why the people will put on a conspiracy hat at this point, because if they're trying to avoid a conspiracy, they're not helping with the names. You've heard me say it before. I'm going to say it again. You know, you got Operation High Jump, Operation Deep Freeze. NASA's formed. They signed this Antarctic Treaty. And then when you look at the high-altitude nuclear bomb tests that began here I'm going to go ahead and read Operation Dominick here. Operation Dominick was a series of 31 nuclear test explosions with a 38.1 megaton total yield conducted in 1962 by the United States in the Pacific. This test series was scheduled quickly in order to respond in kind to the Soviet resumption of testing after the tacit 1958-61 test moratorium. Most of these shots were conducted with free-fall bombs dropped from B-52 bomber aircraft. 20 of these shots were to test new weapons designs, 6 to test weapons effects, and several shots to confirm the reliability of existing weapons. The Thor missile was also used to lift warheads into near space to conduct high-altitude nuclear explosion tests. These shots were collectively called Operation Fishbowl. Operation Dominick occurred during a period of high Cold War tension between the United States and the Soviet Union, since the Cuban Bay of Pigs invasion had occurred not long before. Nikita Khrushchev announced the end of a 3-year moratorium on nuclear testing on 30 August 1961, and Soviet tests recommenced on 1 September, initiating a series of tests that included the detonation of Tsar Bomba. President John F. Kennedy responded by authorizing Operation Dominick. It was the largest nuclear weapons testing program ever conducted by the United States and the last atmospheric test series conducted by the U.S., as the Limited Test Ban Treaty was signed in Moscow the following year. Now, check this out. If you click on Operation Fishbowl, we learn about Operation Fishbowl here. It was a series of high-altitude nuclear tests in 1962 that were carried out by the United States as part of the larger Operation Dominick nuclear test program. The Operation Fishbowl nuclear tests were originally planned to be completed during the first half of 1962, with 3 tests named Bluegill, Starfish, and Orca. The first test attempt was delayed until June. Planning for Operation Fishbowl, as well as many other nuclear tests in the region, was begun rapidly in response to the sudden Soviet announcement on 30 August 1961 that they were ending a 3-year moratorium on nuclear testing. The rapid planning of very complex operations necessitated many changes as the project progressed. All of the tests were to be launched on missiles from Johnston Island in the Pacific Ocean north of the equator. Johnston Island had already been established as a launch site for United States high-altitude nuclear tests rather than the other locations in the Pacific Proving Grounds. In 1958, Lewis Strauss, then chairman of the United States Atomic Energy Commission, opposed doing any high-altitude tests at locations that had been used for earlier Pacific nuclear tests. His opposition was because of fears that the flash from the nighttime high-altitude detonations might blind civilians who were living on nearby islands. Johnston Island was a remote location more distant from populated areas than other potential test locations. In order to protect residents of the Hawaiian Islands from flash blindness or permanent retinal injury from the bright nuclear flash, the nuclear missiles of Operation Fishbowl were launched generally toward the southwest of Johnston Island so that the detonations would be farther from Hawaii. Orca was to be a test of about 1 megaton yield at very high altitude, above 1,000 kilometers. The proposed Orca test was always controversial, especially after the damage caused to satellites by the Starfish Prime detonation, as described below. Orca was finally canceled, and an extensive reevaluation of the Operation Fishbowl plan was made during an 82-day operations pause after the Bluegill Prime disaster of 25 July 1962, as described below. And you could go on and read about Kingfish and all this stuff. Okay, so we got Operation Dominick, within which we have Operation Fishbowl. Now, with the tinfoil hat on, playing conspiracy theory here, the flat earthers are claiming, and I think it's a reasonable claim, that, you know, if that model is true, then we know we have a circle, the circle of the earth as described in the Bible, surrounded by Antarctica, the outer rim, that has a 200 or 300 foot ice wall, cliff, that keeps everything in, hence Operation High Jump. You got to get over that, right? So it looks like, at least from the flat earther perspective, that probably during Operation Deep Freeze, they may have found the edge of the dome, presumably anywhere from 800 to 1,200 miles inland from the coast. Then everybody pulls out, signs this treaty, says nobody can go back except under the express guidelines of the international community that signed the treaty. So then all of a sudden the United States and Russia engaged in these high altitude nuclear tests, and the United States calls theirs Operation Dominick, within which we have Operation Fishbowl. Now hold that thought. This is all happening. If you go and look on the Operation Dominick entry, you see the different dates. We're 1962. This is the early part of 1962. We're talking May. I mean, look at all these bombs going off. 25 April 1962, 27 April, 2 May, 4 May, 6 May, 8 May, 9 May, 11 May, 11 May, 12 May, 14 May, 19, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. This is all before President Kennedy's "Let's go out in the space" speech. But I think a lot of people don't realize that our first stop wasn't the moon. Even before we went to the moon, they were sending probes all of a sudden after all of this. Okay, keep the timeline in mind. Operation High Jump, Operation Deep Freeze, Byrd dies, NASA's founded, Antarctic Treaties signed, Operation Dominick and Fishbowl take effect. And if you notice during President Kennedy's speech, he was talking about that they've already got probes headed to Venus. Wait a minute. We're already sending stuff to Venus and Mars? We haven't even been to the moon yet. And so I was looking into that, and on planetary.org/explore/space topics /space missions /missions to Venus-Mercury.html. And you can go through this site. It starts sort of from the bottom up. As early as February 4th, 1961, they're sending a probe, Sputnik 7. Russia sent this probe to check out Venus. The final stage of the rocket carrying Sputnik 7 into orbit failed, and the spacecraft was unable to achieve the necessary trajectory to carry it onto Venus. Then Venera 1, Russia, sends out another probe February 12, 1961. They lost communications while it was on its way to Venus. Then NASA sends up Mariner 1, July 22nd, 1962. Now, that's right in the middle of Dominick and Fishbowl, that we sent out a probe to go check out Venus. It veered off course and was destroyed by ground controllers. So then Russia sends up another one, Sputnik 19, August 25th, 1962. The spacecraft made it into orbit, but the rocket's last stage failed as Sputnik 19 was unable to achieve its Venus trajectory and re-entered the Earth's atmosphere 3 days later. NASA, August 27th, 1962, sends its probe. It says Mariner 2 was the first spacecraft to successfully fly by Venus at an altitude of 34,773 kilometers. The spacecraft discovered ground temperatures, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so this is during the time period that between August 27th, 1962 and December 14th, 1962 that we had President Kennedy's speech in September, on September 12th, 1962. So that's what he's referring to. You know, we've already got stuff out there, and you can read about the other ones that were, you know, checking out Venus, I guess Mercury also, and attempted probes going to Mars. Now, this is all before we've even been to the moon. So it appears that whatever happened in Antarctica, everybody got kind of maybe nervous or excited or whatever and said, okay, what is the deal? You know, we've looked through telescopes. We've seen our so-called neighbors, Venus and Mars, through telescopes. Our assumption is the solar system is, you know, set up in the Copernican model. And, but yet maybe they found a dome and they started to question all that. So the first thing they do is send out probes to go, wait a minute. What in the world, if we're in a dome, how high does this thing go? So they start launching high altitude nuclear bombs. And if you look at the videos on Operation Fishbowl and Starfish Prime and all those high altitude tests, I mean, it looks like they're hitting something up there. I mean, at least from a conspiratorial tinfoil hat wearing perspective, that's what it looks like. Now, this is what blew my mind. You can read more on all that if you'd like. To get caught up to speed on what's going on there. So I go to Lubbock, and I'm doing this conference out there at Jared Cressman's father's church, Pastor Dan Cressman, and we get to talking about this whole issue of the flat Earth stuff. And he goes, "Do you know what the name Dominick means?" And I said, "No." He says, you talk about Operation Fishbowl, but check this out. I'm going to take you to, I'll put the screen share back up here. Take you to one of those name websites. I like using behindthename.com. Look up the name Dominick, and again, let's just double check it here. Dominick, D-O-M-I-N-I-C. Look up Dominick, D-O-M-I-N-I-C, from the late Latin name Dominicus, meaning of the Lord. Fishbowl was part of Operation Dominick. It looks like they are sending high-altitude nuclear bombs to test the fishbowl of the Lord, i.e., the firmament. Yeah, this is definitely one of those things to make you go,
There's an ice ring, a wall that holds in the oceans that God said, in Job 26:10, that he compassed or put a circle around the waters to make a boundary. If so, and according to the Bible, there is a place, that boundary is called the ends of the earth. Amos 9, where it talks about he made his vault of the heavens, and he literally comes down and he says he bound it, or he attached it to the earth. Enoch talks about this, and I have the quote from Enoch where he said God took him and showed him where the vault of heaven came down and met the earth. So I believe when the Bible talks about the ends of the earth, that we're talking about this boundary called Antarctica.
Stuff is amazing, People go down there and all of a sudden everybody decides to, we need an Antarctic treaty. So people pull out of there and they all get into this room that has like a triangle, pyramid-looking thing there, and they sign this document, this Antarctic treaty, saying nobody can go back down there except under the express guidelines of this treaty. And then immediately after that, in the same time period, with Operation Deep Freeze in 56 time frame, 57 that time period, they pull out of there, Admiral Byrd dies, NASA's created in 58, DARPA's created in 58, Antarctic Treaty is, I believe, signed in 61, and in 62, you have the United States and Russia sending high-altitude nuclear bombs into the sky. And the United States calls our part in that Operation Fishbowl part of a larger project called Project Dominick. Well, if you look up the name Dominick, what does the name Dominick mean? It means of the Lord. So the United States called their high-altitude nuclear bomb tests Fishbowl of the Lord after coming back from Antarctica.
Johnston Island was the center of launch and experimental activity for the 1962 high-altitude weapon effects testing termed Operation Fishbowl. At the northwestern end of the island was the Thor launch complex, joined later by Nike Hercules and Stripey units, plus a second Thor pad. On Operation Fishbowl, nuclear detonations rent the sky 5 times.
Now, if they're trying to avoid a conspiracy, they're not helping with the names.
Additional construction on Johnston Island during this interim, as well as the scheduling of more shots, reflected the value attached to the testing being carried out on Operation Dominick. 3 more high-altitude effects missile events were added to secure data at different heights. Also, 5 more over-ocean airdrops were scheduled, these to take place within the Johnston Island danger area. Besides a second Thor launch pad, the construction included facilities for the launch of XM-33 rockets and Nike Hercules missiles. All remaining launches culminated in detonation at their planned altitudes. First came Checkmate, boosted to altitude by a Sargent-engined XM-33 rocket.
It looks like maybe they found something there in Antarctica, they being the nations that decided, hey, we need a treaty. So therefore, one of the things say, well, okay, what's the motivation? Well, if this is true, that they found something down there that is contrary to the scientism model, the Copernican model, if you will, then they've got a lot of lying to cover up. Why did they all of a sudden, immediately, want to find out what's out there, and at the same time, let's send nuclear bombs into the sky? I'm asking questions. It looks very suspicious to me. And it tells me that if that is true, we're in an enclosed world, and they figured that out, then their motivation is A, to protect themselves, to hide that fact from us because of all the other lies they've been telling us for 500 years, and B, they have no vested interest in the whole world turning to God. So effectively, they would be hiding God.